I am Mike Coolidge in for Dan Proft. Over 20 years ago, I spent a little time, better part of a year, in the Middle East, particularly in Kuwait and Iraq, the very beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And things are a little hairy there right now. They've been for a couple of weeks now. Recently, we keep having these ceasefires, and then the ceasefire is broken. The Strait of Hormuz is blocked, and then maybe it's not. Andrew Collingwood is going to join us here. He's the co-host of the Multipolarity podcast and writer of the Multipolarity Brief on multipolaritypod.substack.com. He has a column out, "There is no alternative to the Strait of Hormuz." Andrew Collingwood, welcome and good morning.
Well, thanks for having me on, Mike.
Yes. And where are you joining us from, by the way, should I ask? Are you here in the States or are you overseas?
No, I'm not. I'm in the northeast of England.
Oh, and you sound crystal clear, like you're here in studio with us. I absolutely love it.
Well, I've got my podcast mic all hooked up just for you guys. So
it's great. It's the wonders of technology in this modern age. All right, your column is really interesting, and it kind of contrasts to KT McFarland, who joined Dan on the show yesterday. Why do you say there is no alternative to the Strait of Hormuz in your column, and what do you mean that the president is in a geopolitical twister?
Well, the president, of course, is a big UFC fan, and the twister is a rare submission move in mixed martial arts where the head is held one way and kind of cranked in one direction while the victim's hips are kind of controlled and squeezed in the other. And that puts the spine under all kinds of agonizing pressure, the sort of thing that you and I, Mike, wouldn't like to be involved in.
Yes.
And and at the moment, I feel, unfortunately, that President Trump has found himself in something like a geopolitical twister where the central conundrum that he faces is that the US Air Force has been unable to suppress Iran's ability to fire drones and missiles to the extent where Iran is now still able to inflict pretty serious damage on US bases and its allies in the region. But most importantly, shut off the flow of energy from the Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz. And by doing that, it's essentially sanctioning planet Earth. But on the other hand, the alternative to this seems to be to agree to something like the terms outlined in the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding from several weeks ago, which really are quite a painful crystallization of US strategic defeat in this conflict. And that's why I call it a geopolitical twister, because his hips are being controlled in one direction while his head's being cranked in the other. The problem that I see is that, unfortunately, what's happening is that while many analysts have woken up to this idea that really they're in a bit of a bad situation at the moment, a kind of comforting narrative is emerging among people who I think should know better. And that is this, that although the Strait of Hormuz is allowing Iran to put the whole globe and, by extension, Washington under serious economic pressure, the Gulf states will build bypass pipelines and they'll start exporting their oil through these rather than the Strait of Hormuz. And that makes the Strait of Hormuz, I quote, a wasting asset. It will get less valuable over time. A lot of your listeners are business owners. They know just what a wasting asset is. Mm-hmm. I think that this really mistakes, at a fundamental level, it really mistakes means for ends. So Iran's end during this war was to essentially wage a counter-value war against the US, where instead of just attacking US military targets, what it was going to do is it was going to try to squeeze the US economically. And the means by which it was going to do that was by cutting off the oil coming out of the Gulf region. Now, the way it did that happened to be the Strait of Hormuz. It was what was available. It was easy to shut down. But that's not the only way that it can do it. Look, it's just bullseyed these phenomenally expensive radars attached to THAAD missile batteries, which are some of the most well-protected physical structures in the world. So it's shown clearly that it has the will and the accuracy of missiles to quite easily destroy pipeline infrastructure and energy infrastructure like export terminals, refineries, and even oil extraction systems themselves. So if the Strait of Hormuz was off the table, if suddenly it wasn't available as a means of exporting oil, well, they could just start destroying Gulf energy infrastructure. And in fact, that would be even worse because the Strait of Hormuz can be reopened relatively quickly. You know, it's difficult to rebuild pumping stations and pipelines. So my point is here that although you can build bypass pipelines and use those to export your oil from Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or Kuwait or wherever, still Iran would have a kind of sword of Damocles hanging over the head of these Gulf nations when that finally happens.
You don't have an optimistic viewpoint, correct me if I'm wrong, with how this might play out. You write the deeper strategic reality is therefore darker and more potentially unstable than the pipeline's optimism suggests. And we heard that viewpoint from KT McFarland yesterday, that the pipeline is becoming less and less important for the reasons you mentioned, different choices that powers make about where they get their oil from. But you say that it's not just Iran that can have power over the straits. It's anyone really who wants to disrupt it in the future. And in a larger question, the larger question, why do you seem to not have optimism that this is going to end well?
Well, what's happened, Mike, over the last 30 years or so is that there's been a proliferation of standoff precision strike. And when I say standoff precision strike, I mean like missiles that are able to hit targets quite accurately and drones that are able to do the same thing. At the turn of the century, America had something like a monopoly on this kind of high-tech warfare. We saw that in the first Gulf War in the late 80s, early 90s. We saw that in the second Gulf War as well. But since then, this technology has really proliferated around the world. And it seems at the moment that there's just no defense against that. You know, you have these incredibly expensive anti-air missile systems like THAAD or like the Patriots, which cost, tens of millions of dollars a pop, essentially. I think even the Patriots, which are cheaper, cost $2 or $3 million a missile to fire off.
Yeah.
And
I've seen them and heard them right over my head, actually.
Well, there you go. And I mean, these things, even if they do hit, and they don't hit every single missile, and they can't seem to reliably knock down ballistic missiles coming at targets, but even if they do hit them all, the rate of economic exchange is horrendous. You've got a $20,000 lawnmower with wings being shot down by a $3 million high-tech, exquisite class missile, as President Trump might call them. And that's not a good rate of economic exchange, even when you compare the size of the US economy to the size of the Iranian economy. So it leaves nations like Iran, who have the willingness to tolerate and resist the quite serious economic damage and death that the most powerful air force in the world can still exact, the opportunity to essentially wage these counter-value battles. And indeed, it seems that Iran now is moving beyond counter-value and going into counter-force. It's attacking directly US bases in the region. We recently saw them hit a base in Jordan, and I believe there were some casualties, sadly, there.
Yeah, American casualties, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems that the old means of kind of expeditionary and maritime great powers like the United States has been, and my country, Great Britain, was for 100 or so years before that, being able to control trade and exert pressure on recalcitrant nations through its ability to apply force and control these maritime choke points, logistics bottlenecks. That appears to be over as long as the states that sit on those bottlenecks and choke points are sufficiently determined. And in Iran's case, of course, because President Trump and his negotiators before him made it very clear that their war aims, or before that negotiation aims, were a kind of disarmament of Iran and ultimately regime change that has made Iran sufficiently determined. Like if the alternative is the dissolution of your very state and your kind of revolutionary regime, which you've been brought up to believe in, then you're willing to tolerate quite a lot of damage. And that's the situation until we can find, I don't know, lasers or like some kind of cheap version of old-fashioned flak guns or something like that. It seems that this is going to be the modern strategic reality. And I find that very dark, but we might be back to that stage where we have to negotiate with these nations who sit on top of these choke points, and, we can't just impose our will anymore.
Well, we seem to be, negotiating with them. We're definitely talking with them. And we have a question here from the alphawealthgroup.com talk and text line at 312-642-5600. The biggest question, or the second biggest one, other than how does this end? What do we do then to get the Iranian mullahs to submit? A question from 847. What do we do?
Well, I'm not sure that the question anymore is relevant, unfortunately, Mike, because I think the option here is to accept something like Iran's terms, which would crystallize quite a painful strategic defeat for the United States and Israel, or continue on the current path, which simply isn't working. I don't think the United States has sufficient land forces, even if it had the political will to send its, the best of American young men into the teeth of Iranian defenses and that kind of horrendous topography for invasion. Even if it had that, the US only has about 14 active divisions between the US Marine Corps and the US Army. And that is probably insufficient if you look at, American military doctrine and you look at force to population and force to surface area ratios for invasions. It's just probably insufficient. So the alternative is to continue the way you're going, draining your arsenals, draining your magazines, and kind of not getting anywhere, like banging your head against a brick wall.
Well, what about allies? Allies like the UK? What about a coalition force, if you will?
Mike, everything that you have been told about how bad the state of the UK armed forces is not sufficiently bleak enough to demonstrate how bad it is. Like when a UK base in Cyprus was hit by an errant or perhaps deliberate Iranian drone, it took us weeks to get a destroyer with air defenses into the region. We just didn't have one available. A single destroyer. Imagine that, the Royal Navy. We have a handful of frigates and destroyers. Obviously, these things need to be refurbished. You have to understand that the United States is the most powerful Navy, Air Force, and expeditionary land force in the world, bar none. China is rising, but in terms of expeditionary power, it's nowhere near the United States. So if the US can't do it with the help of Israel, which also has an impressive air force given the size of its nation, then there is no other combination of nations from Europe, from the Gulf, including Japan, whatever, that are going to be able to do. You're just going to keep hammering missiles and hammering bombs against these kind of mountain targets and struggling to get anywhere. I think the alternative, it's going to be painful, but there's a possibility there. And I don't know how this is going to go down with you or your listeners, but I'm going to say it anyway. The MOU, as I said earlier, crystallized a kind of painful strategic defeat because it was essentially an Iranian wish list, okay? But it did have some kind of nuclear provisions regarding Iran's nuclear program there. Now, Iran has a kind of, as we said, a willingness and a determination to suffer these strikes at the moment because it's cut off from the global trading system. It's pressured with the potential of regime change. Really, what does it have to lose? But an Iran that was reintegrated into the world and was trading freely with the world, and was part of the global system, so to speak.
We got about 20 seconds.
It would start having things to lose. So painful as it would be and uncomfortable as it would be, maybe that's a long-term option.
Andrew Collingwood, we appreciate you coming on Multi-Party Podcast, multipolaritypod.substack.com. Thanks for joining us, Andrew Collingwood.
This is The Morning Show. More Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
If you haven't switched to Pure Talk because you're not sure their coverage is every bit as reliable as Big Wireless, why not take them for a test drive? For a limited time, Pure Talk is offering any of their plans for just $15 a month for the first 3 months, including their top-tier unlimited data plan. No contracts, no commitments. Just a great deal on a high-speed network with unlimited data from an American wireless company. Dial pound 250, say Mike Rowe, and let the savings begin.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle